Welcome to Performance and Health. Performance and Health is the product of a mechanical engineer with a passion for human physiology and its relation to athletic performance and longevity. Although at the pointy end of things, these two goals clash with one another, there are still many similarities between the two and much to be learnt from studying both of them. Athletes, both amateur and professional, must focus on their longevity to have a long career and be successful throughout it without compromising their ability to function well into later life. And someone looking to maximise their lifespan and health span must focus on their cardiovascular health and physical strength if they are to live a long and mobile life. If you are a regular listener and have not done so yet, please be sure to leave the podcast a rating and share it amongst your friends. And if you are new, well then, enjoy your first episode, which I hope to be the first of many for you. And with that, let's get into today's episode. Welcome back, one and all. In this episode, we're going to be talking about coffee and simply whether it's good or bad for you, where the kind of line can be drawn and what the possible benefits and side effects can be of this widely consumed beverage. With that, coffee is one of the most popular and widely consumed beverages worldwide due to its stimulating effects on the central nervous system. And its taste and aroma also lead to people being quite fanatical about it in some cases. I personally am a big fan of coffee and purchase kind of these single origin beans and spend time dialing in grind size and coffee to water ratios and so on and so forth. And people go even further than I do. So coffee has got a real cult following around it, and in things like cycling and running, there's a bit of a kind of culture around stopping off at locations, have a nice coffee, a cake, and go on about your business. So in 2016 alone, the production of raw coffee amounted to approximately 9.1 billion kilograms of coffee. And it's estimated that 2.25 billion cups of coffee are consumed each day worldwide. Coffee is a complex mixture of more than 800 volatile compounds, where caffeine and chlorogenic acids are the most common compounds found. The view of coffee has progressively moved to a less and less negative position on health over the years due to its better known pharmacology, but people still tend to bash it sometimes in the media, and there's always an article floating around suggesting all the negative outcomes of this coffee that you're consuming. But for adults consuming moderate amounts of coffee, somewhere in around the 3 to 4 cup region, which equates to about 300 to 400 milligrams of caffeine per day, there's still little evidence of health risks and some evidence of health benefits and other benefits outside of general health. So if this all sounds interesting, this is what we'll be diving into. And for a bit more detail, before you wonder, do I carry on? I'll be going into the amounts of caffeine in different beverages such as coffee and tea, and then how it compares to instant versions and other soft drinks, the general methods of action of coffee and how it works on the body, and some kind of little interesting facts and what the stimulating effects can result in. A list of kind of positive outcomes from things like all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, cancer, and others. Its effects on cognition and its effects on sleep, and then some other kind of negative side effects that can be seen in coffee and large amounts of coffee consumptions, and periods in your life that may mean that reducing the amount of coffee consumption or going to a decaf may be beneficial, and what sort of times those are. So if this sounds of interest, let's go on with the episode. Before going any further, I'd like to get this disclaimer out of the way. The content and materials featured or linked to in this podcast are for your information and education only, and are not intended to address your particular personal requirements. The information does not constitute medical advice or recommendation and should not be considered as such. I'm not a medical professional and therefore not able to give medical advice. So let's start with getting some bits of general housekeeping kind of out of the way, and how much caffeine is actually in certain drinks. So your standard cup of coffee brewed with like a drip method is going to be anywhere from 60 to 120 grams of caffeine, the nominal kind of being about 85. Instant's going to be slightly less, about 75. Decaf is still going to have caffeine in it, but we're talking like 3 grams. And then an espresso is going to contain about 40 grams, ranging from about 30 to 50. This can vary obviously on the method of extraction, how well extracted it is, how long the shot is. In this case, it's referring to a 30 ml shot. So, kind of adjust that as you will for the amount of caffeine the amount of coffee you would actually be brewing. Teas, unlike what a lot of people may say, doesn't have caffeine or whatever, a cup of tea can have anywhere from 25 to 110 milligrams of caffeine. I may have mentioned grams earlier, meant to say milligrams. So it does still contain caffeine, almost as much as coffee, depending on which tea you're purchasing, how long you're brewing it for. But the kind of nominal amount will be about 60 milligrams. And then iced tea beverages could be anywhere from 9 to 50. Soft drinks like Coca-Cola are 360, or I think they're 330 ml can. Nominal amounts about 40 milligrams. Energy drinks about 80. It's very common to see 250 ml cans of Red Bull to have about 75 milligrams of caffeine. Cocoa beverages like hot chocolate based things can be about 6. Chocolate milk can have 5. So these next numbers are kind of very insignificant for the most part, but you can end up consuming caffeine in things that you didn't realize it's present in, but to a very small case. So energy drinks, soft drinks, teas and coffee tend to be your big hitters in the amount of caffeine that is present in them. Now, most people kind of, generally understand how coffee is working, but for a better understanding, let's kind of dive into that now. Caffeine is completely absorbed by the stomach and the small intestine within about 45 minutes of oral ingestion, but will appear in the blood within minutes, peaking somewhere between 30 and 120 minutes. The hydrophobic properties of caffeine allow it for its passage through all biological membranes, including the blood-brain barrier, which keeps certain things out. And the peak plasma concentration is reached within 15 to 20 minutes after oral ingestions in humans. 95% of caffeine is then metabolized in the liver by various different enzymes. While the average half-life of caffeine is generally reported to be between 4 and 6 hours, it does vary quite a bit between individuals, and even may range from 1.5 hours to 10 hours in adults. So a really wide range, and we'll get into later how this kind of impacts sleep, but it's something that needs to kind of be paid attention to when you're consuming this, how long you feel the stimulating effects for. The wide range of variability in caffeine metabolism is due to several factors. The rate of caffeine metabolism may be inhibited or decreased with pregnancy or the use of hormone or contraceptives, increased or induced by heavy caffeine use, cigarette smoking, or modified in either direction by certain dietary factors and or variation in the gene known as CYP1A2. Over 95% of caffeine is metabolized by CYP1A2 enzyme, which is encoded by the CYP1A2 gene and is involved in the demethylation of caffeine into primary metabolites and, as stated before, metabolized in the liver. This gene will have a drastic effect on the caffeine sensitivity, metabolism, and response of an individual. So if you were super keen, you could find these kind of things out, but you can simply experiment at home roughly to understand. Especially if you're someone who's quite into coffee and weighs out beans and grinds them and then brews it, you can somewhat, you're not going to know the exact amount of caffeine, but from there you can start seeing that, after 25 grams of coffee in one sitting, I do start to get jittery, or I really feel the effects. Whereas 20, it's a much more sort of moderate stimulation. And if you know other people who are also into coffee and weigh out beans, you can sort of do a comparison. And like, for example, I know people who 13 to 15 is kind of their range, and going up to 20 is kind of like absurd in one sitting. So yeah, you can kind of get a gauge from that. So from there, if we move on to what's actually going on with caffeine more specifically. So the principal mode of action of caffeine at doses in normal human consumption is as an antagonist of adenosine receptors, well, of adenosine itself. But to a nerve cell in the brain, caffeine looks a lot like adenosine, and as a result, caffeine binds to the adenosine receptor. The easy way to look at this is like, imagine you've got a jigsaw puzzle and you've got two pieces that both fit physically the same block or the same other piece, but obviously one of them is the correct one and makes the image look as it should, and one of them is incorrect but still fits. That's effectively what is happening. Caffeine is able to bind and park itself in that same spot. So unlike adenosine, caffeine doesn't slow down the cell's activity as adenosine would. As a result, the cell can no longer identify adenosine because caffeine is taking up all the receptors that adenosine would normally bind to. And instead of slowing down because of the adenosine effect, the nerve cells speed up. Caffeine also causes the brain's blood vessels to constrict because it blocks adenosine's ability to dilate them. Caffeine's effect on the brain also induces increased neuron firing. The pituitary gland senses this activity and assumes some sort of emergency must be occurring. So it releases epinephrine, a hormone that tells the adrenal glands to produce adrenaline. Adrenaline is the fight or flight hormone that you're probably aware of already and aware of its effects. And it has a number of effects that I'll now kind of go over. Your pupils will often dilate. The airways open up. This is why people suffering from severe asthma attacks are sometimes injected with epinephrine. Your heart beats faster in response. The blood vessels on the surface constrict to slow blood flow from cuts to increase blood flow to muscles. Blood pressure rises, blood flow to the stomach slows, the liver releases sugar into the bloodstream for extra energy, muscles tighten up, ready for action. And this explains why after consuming a big cup of coffee, your hands get cold, your muscles grow tense, and you feel excited and your heart beats faster. These are all kind of things because obviously our bodies have evolved outside of these kind of stimulants in a way, and they are seeing this release of adrenaline as a sign that an emergency, not just maybe that you've been cut, but that you're about to fight something, or you've seen a predator or some kind of competitor in your environment. And all these lists of effects are obviously lists that are going to be highly beneficial in an environment where you need to either fight or escape from a predator or some kind of situation that requires, for lack of a better word, superhuman strength in a way is a kind of easy way to look at it. And caffeine stimulates all these effects, and this is where some of the cognitive boosts and physical improvements come from. There are an awfully long list of benefits to caffeine, all usually related to the amount that is consumed, and for that reason I'm going to kind of go over the big hitters. There may be others that you will have heard of or seen written anywhere, some with more and some with less kind of evidence pointing towards them, but let's start with all-cause mortality, the kind of big one. So in a study by Grosso, sorry if I'm saying these names wrong, but Grosso and colleagues, high coffee consumers in the 7 cups per day category have been shown to have as much as a 10% reduction in all-cause mortality. However, the largest benefit came from 3 cups a day, where 17% reduction in all-cause mortality was seen, and a 4% reduction came from just a single cup a day. As someone who's a big fan of coffee, I am left wondering whether the type and dosage, of the single coffee would make a difference. So for example, I couldn't find necessarily whether the dosage of coffee was related to a volumetric amount or of fluid, whether it was a volumetric amount of, a mass amount of bean. It was kind of unclear, and anyone who's really into coffee understands that different beans and can vary drastically in how they taste. So I don't personally know whether there's a kind of drastic difference in how much caffeine they have inside them, and different extraction methods will result in different amounts of caffeine coming through. But I think generally you can see that these larger consumptions of coffee seem to have improved outcomes and seems to drop off at a certain point. So it's kind of unclear to some extent. It also seems to have an effect on cardiovascular disease. Coffee consumption has been consistently associated with a lower risk of mortality from coronary heart disease, stroke, and all-cause cardiovascular disease, again in a non-linear fashion. The largest drop in relative risk is seen at the 3 cups a day mark, same as all-cause mortality, compared with non-drinkers. Risk were reduced by 19% for mortality in cardiovascular disease, with a 16% for mortality from coronary heart disease, and then a 30% for mortality from stroke. At this level of intake being 3 cups a day. It then differs. There is also some evidence it may positively affect blood pressure, but this is yet to kind of be reached in any sort of significance from any studies that I could find. I think it's a good time to mention that I take most of these results with a slight pinch of salt. You may not reach these numbers in risk reduction exactly, but it's probably fair to say around these points that as long as coffee isn't impacting your sleep, then it's likely having a positive effect on your overall health. Now, we will get onto that as to what the kind of effects can be of sleep, but for now, just mainly focusing on the benefits. And so also these numbers have some kind of meaning. Exercise is considered the single greatest behavioral, modifiable, however you want to put it, factor that impacts our health. Being in the going from a sedentary state to just above average in your VO2 max, which is a measurement, effectively, to keep it simple, a measurement of your aerobic fitness, so your ability to do activities with oxygen present / in abundance. We're getting too deep into that, but simply the VO2 max metric, if you are above average in your age category, you will see a 3 times reduction, so a 300% reduction in all-cause mortality. So it makes you see that caffeine is although 16% is and 19% is a number that most people probably wouldn't pass up on, but we're talking orders of magnitude smaller than exercise. So if you're starting to consume coffee and don't exercise, and you're doing it because of the said health outcomes, there are other modifiable factors, aka exercise, that would be of greater benefit to yourself. Coffee consumption has also been consistently associated with a lower risk of type 2 diabetes for high versus low consumption, achieving a risk reduction of approximately 30%. A consumption of decaffeinated coffee also seemed to have similar associations of comparable magnitude, with points toward caffeine not necessarily being the primary driver of health benefits seen. For metabolic syndrome, high versus low coffee consumption was associated with a 9% lower risk. And I think that's an important thing to note as you kind of look through it more. Obviously, a lot of people associate coffee with caffeine, but it's not necessarily the caffeine that is causing the positive health outcomes necessarily, because things like decaf still seem to show benefits. Decaf, anyone again who's really sort of interested in different coffees and has tried decaf and looked into the process, there are various processes of doing it, and you can lose various compounds through the different processes. And this could mean that not every decaf is made equally, and as such why I am interested to know whether not every coffee is also made equal. Then cancer, another big hitter. The risk of cancer also appears to reduce by as much as 13% in high coffee consumers, with 2% coming from a single cup a day when compared to non-consumption. The list of such cancers included endometrial cancer, melanoma, oral cancer, leukemia, non-melanoma, skin cancer, and liver cancer. For prostate, endometrial and melanoma and liver cancer, again with a linear dose-related response. Some studies have put forward up to a 59% increase in lung cancer, so not ideal, between non-coffee drinkers and high consumers. However, in studies correcting for smoking, that risk drops to about 8 to 5. That percentage actually drops to about between an 8% increased chance of lung cancer to a 5% decrease. So that's a big thing that you may see, and a good thing to think about when you're looking through, especially studies that are observational, which a lot of these studies tend to be, is that in some cases these are, and it's not malicious by any means, sometimes it's the date of the study or it was overlooked in some cases and it wasn't adjusted for. There can be external factors that could be causing this. And again, why I'm saying take some of these as a pinch of salt, because when something's like a 5% reduction in, say, all-cause mortality, it could be that this group of people studied happened to be, say, cyclists, and they could have been just other factors such as exercise that could have been actually causing that, in comparison to another sample study who didn't drink coffee because it's not part of their culture and their habits instead are less healthy, active habits. Just like cancer, one that people will be likely very interested in due to how much of a kind of scary / horrible way this disease can be to die is neurological outcomes such as Parkinson's disease. So coffee's effect on neurological outcomes has been shown to associated with a lower risk of Parkinson's disease even after adjustment for smoking. Decaffeinated coffee again maintained a lower risk for Parkinson's disease, which did not reach significant in studies. There was kind of a few pointing towards it, but not many. Consumption is reported to have a consistent association with a lower risk of depression and cognitive disorders, especially for Alzheimer's disease, where as much as a 27% reduction can be seen within certain studies. Now, moving on from the kind of clear health benefits, you've got some kind of other things that people will be interested in, such as the effects of caffeine on cognition. So let's get on to that. So something that I guess loads of people use this for, whether it's for professional or just in employment or it's students for studying, is the effectively sort of performance enhancing effects on your cognition. In addition to exercise performance, caffeine has also been studied for its contribution to athletes of all types who are routinely required to undergo periods of sustained cognitive function and vigilance during their sporting requirements. It's also been tested kind of in the military, where often people can be sleep deprived and then at the drop of a dime need to go into a combat ready state. So a 2016 review concluded that caffeine in doses from 32 milligrams to 300 milligrams for an individual who weighs 75 kilos enhance specific aspects of cognitive performance, such as attention, vigilance, and reaction time, and it also improved mood. Spirit also concluded that lower doses of caffeine, approximately 200 milligrams, improved cognitive process associated with exercise, including vigilance, alertness, and mood. Hongevert et al. Studied 24 well-trained cyclists that were randomized to 3 groups. Group 1 consumed a bar containing 45 grams of carbohydrate and 100 milligrams of caffeine. Group 2, an isocaloric non-caffeinated performance bar, and group 3 who received a placebo beverage, basically a non-caloric flavored water, immediately before performing a 2.5-hour ride followed by a time to exhaustion time trial. They found that the caffeine in a carbohydrate-containing performance bar significantly improved both endurance performance and complex cognitive ability during and after exercise. Other studies have shown improvements in problem solving and reasoning as well. All very key things for anyone, even in a non-performance environment, directly to physical performance. It can just be interviews, it can be exams, it can be anything where even just general learning, this can be a key tool that can be used to peak your performance. This is where caffeine clearly can have the effect on more than just, physical performance, as I've said. So this is something where some clarity. So a lot of what I've already said is more to show that caffeine doesn't necessarily have a negative impact on health. And then here's some kind of insight onto the effects past just the anecdotal stuff of I feel more alert when I have caffeine. Well, here's some kind of evidence to go with it and why it could be happening. Now, there are two main areas that cropped up that had a reasonable body of research going around them and kind of guidelines around caffeine and where it can be detrimental to human health. And the two key ones were coffee and pregnancy, and then coffee's effect on sleep. So we'll start with pregnancy as the first. So there is evidence for harmful associations of coffee consumptions with different outcomes related to pregnancy. High versus low consumption has been associated with a higher risk of low birth weight by 31%, pregnancy loss by 46%, and first trimester preterm birth by 22%, and a second trimester preterm birth by 12%. There's also consistency in association between high versus low coffee consumption in pregnancy and a higher risk of childhood leukemia by 57% and any versus no consumption by 44%. Now, this is intended to inform or scare people. Still, for me personally, I think the numbers are significant enough that considering pregnancy is a temporary thing, it's probably worth eliminating it from your diet for that sort of period of time. Now, it may be true or false that this is the case, that it is going to cause any of these things, and they're all just risk factors. So you can, just like you have people who smoke and never have a clear negative health outcome, it's, I would say, better to err on the safer side of things. Now on to caffeine's effect on sleep. So the impacts of caffeine on sleep are widely studied. Sleep is an essential component of physiological and psychological recovery from and preparation for high intensity training in athletes and learning of new skills for people in general. Chronic mild to moderate sleep deprivation in athletes has in some cases been attributed to caffeine intake and may result in negative or altered impacts of glucose metabolism, neuroendocrine function, appetite, food intake, and protein synthesis, as well as attention, learning, and memory. These factors can all influence an athlete's nutritional, metabolic, and endocrine status negatively, and hence potentially affect energy levels, muscle repair, immunity, body composition, memory, and learning, and result in diminished athletic performance. Now, for people in endurance sports, that is not particularly technical learning, may be a bit of an afterthought, but in team sports where new drills, skills, and set plays are being learned all the time, learning is a critical part of professional athletes' game and should not be shortchanged. Now, although these are specific to athletes, really all people are going to need sleep is critical in general for long-term health, and is being shown to have shortchanging it or just reducing it and having chronically poor sleep has been shown to cause increases in every illness and ailment under the sun. Objective sleep measures using actigraphy actigraphy or carried out in laboratories conditions with EEGs have shown that caffeine negatively impacts several aspects of sleep quality, such as sleep latency, which is the time it takes you to fall asleep, WASO, which is wake time after sleep onset, sleep efficiency, and duration. Sleep efficiency, a kind of good way of doing it is like it usually decreases as you age, but it's effectively there's sort of a period where you're not actually asleep, even though obviously you're not you're not cognizant during it, you're not aware that it's happened, but it's effectively the time it takes, the useful product of your sleep. How much time while you're asleep is it actually in various key sleep stages. Studies in athletes have also shown that adverse effects on sleep quality and markers for exercise recovery after a variety of doses of caffeine ingestion. Although caffeine is associated with sleep disturbances, caffeine has also been shown to improve vigilance and reaction time and improve physical performance after sleep deprivation. This may be beneficial for, athletes or individuals who are going to have jet lag. So say you're maybe going for a business meeting in another country that's going to result in jet lag, then obviously caffeine has been shown to drastically improve cognition and your ability to function really at a high level while sleep deprived. But it can itself lead to that sleep deprivation if used chronically at the incorrect times. So even though caffeine ingestion may hinder sleep quality, the time of day which caffeine is ingested will likely determine the incidence of these negative effects. So this doesn't mean you have to drop caffeine altogether if you want to have a good night's sleep. But, for example, in one study that included a sample size of 13 participants, ingestion of caffeine in the morning hours negatively affected sleep only in one participant, likely someone whose half-life of caffeine was exceptionally long or with a high sensitivity to caffeine. However, ingestion of caffeine in the late afternoon, something like 6 o'clock, resulted in insomnia effects among 6 participants, so almost half the sample size. These results are likely explained by half-life of caffeine, which is generally around 4 to 6 hours, even though it varies between individuals. Now, the easy way to look at it is, now it's obviously going to vary from individual to individual, but let's just say 60 milligrams of caffeine in the blood is needed to cause insomnia. Now, if you have 120 milligrams of caffeine at 8 or 9 a.m. and the half-life is 6 hours, well, 6 hours from 9 o'clock, well, let's just say it's 2. Probably got that completely wrong, but it's now 60 milligrams, and then you add 6 onto that, 8 o'clock, you're now at 30 milligrams. So by the time you go to bed at 10, you've probably got 28, 27 milligrams in you. Whereas if you had it at 6, you're still going to have over that 60 milligram threshold if you have 120 milligram coffee by the time you actually go to bed. And obviously there's a time for it to peak in the blood, so you could have as high as 70 milligrams still in your system, which then say the threshold is 60 milligrams for you as an individual. There you have it. Now, outside of using any kind of objective sleep methods, I think simply the best way is to really cut out if you are a poor sleeper, first cut out caffeine completely if you can, and then go to a model where you are sleeping a reasonable amount, such as 8 hours a night. See how you feel after that, and then go back to your coffee consumption later in the day, and you will see the effects. And then you can yourself have a measure at which you can dial back when and how much caffeine you're having at different parts of the day, and discover where maybe for you can have coffee at lunchtime and still feel as rested the next day. But then you notice suddenly, if I'm having it at 2 p.m, it drops off a cliff, I struggle to get to sleep, my mind's racing. And so people often, because it's habitual and they don't necessarily know what it actually feels like necessarily to be fully rested, it's good to kind of self-experiment rather than just saying, I'm someone who can drink coffee at 9 p.m. You may be able to get to sleep. Like I myself have in the past been able to have an espresso at 7 p.m. and go to bed, but clearly the quality of that sleep was probably poor. So rather than leaving it to anecdote and just assuming that because you've done it in the past it's correct, and then when it's too late you didn't know that's what it was. Give it a try. Give out either cutting it out or simply having 1 a day or 2 a day before lunch, and then seeing how it affects your sleep later on, how quickly you fall asleep, and so on and so forth. So to summarize all of this, simply, a lot of this is observational. There are clearly key studies in athletes to show the kind of cognitive benefits, the effects on sleep, but the positive health outcomes seem to all come from mainly observational data. But simply, there doesn't seem to be, other than for pregnant women, there doesn't seem to be any reason why having a couple cups of coffee per day up until lunchtime will have any negative or serious negative outcomes. Obviously, there may be individuals who do, and if you do think you're suffering from it, either cut it out or go and see your doctor, especially if, again, you are currently pregnant. Talk to your doctor first before continuing or increasing your caffeine consumption. So thank you for listening to today's episode. If you want more content like this, there are plenty of previous episodes to check out. But before you do, why not follow the podcast and leave a rating wherever you get your podcasts from, or even better, share it with a friend. For comments, feedback, or if you would like to suggest a topic for future episodes, I can be contacted at the VO2lounge@gmail.com. And with that, I will see you in the next one.